Welcome to the Stories Told podcast. This is episode 48. Farewell, Dr. Jones. Please. This is the Stories Told podcast. Two authors talking about stories in movies, TV, and of course, books.
I'm Michael Grayford. I write action-adventure stories in fantasy and sci-fi worlds, sometimes for younger readers and sometimes for adults. And I try to always inject at least a little bit of humor.
And I am author E.W. Barnes, and I write action-adventure, time travel novels, and space opera science fiction. Thousands of years, thousands of worlds. But be forewarned, beyond here, there will be spoilers. Are you ready for the adventure? Let's begin. Welcome back to the Stories Told podcast. I'm author E.W. Barnes, and with me is author Michael Grayford. And today we're talking about the story told in Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. How you doing today, Mike?
I'm doing good today. How are you?
Doing well, thank you. And what's new in your writing world?
Not much new, just continuing from what we discussed last week, just continuing to work on the second story in the Zara series. Still writing on that. Still doing the first draft. How about you?
I am also still working on the second book in The Adventures of the Empyrean Guard. That book's title is Ecliptic. I have finished all of the editing. So I have gone through where I have all the brackets and inserted like new names or characteristics, or double-checked some of my World Bible stuff to make sure I'm consistent with what I'm calling things. And the last thing I'm going to work on today is I have this whole big list of what I call threads of ideas or things that I think I want to incorporate into the story. So I'm going to go through that list of threads and see if I still want to do them. And if so, I need to decide where to do them, or decide that my character took the story in a different direction, so I don't need that thread anymore. So that's going to happen today. And then it'll be back to the hardcore writing. I have done all the editing, should know exactly where I'm going now, and we'll start pounding out some words. I also am continuing to do the editing of the fourth in my time travel series, and those chapters are going up on YouTube. I'll put those links in the show notes. And as a reminder to our listeners, you can read The Adventures of the Empyrean Guard as it's being written on Patreon. And Mike's Tales of Zara are available on Amazon. And those links will also be in the show notes. So what interesting stories have you come across lately in books or movies or television?
Let's see. I've been watching a show on, I think it's Paramount Plus, called Rabbit Hole. It stars Kiefer Sutherland, and it's kind of like a espionage thriller type story. It's a TV series, and yeah, it's pretty cool. I don't know that I would say it's great yet, but it's interesting. It gets off to kind of a slow start in the first episode, but then there's some twists that happen, and it's caught my attention for sure. So I'm going to probably see it through the rest of I think there's just one season out so far anyway. So I'll probably watch through the rest of the season. It's interesting enough. And I think that's it. Other than that, I've just been working on writing stuff. Do you have any cool stories that you've read or watched recently?
We're still watching the Percy Jackson series on Disney Plus, and that comes out weekly, so we have to wait. We've caught up, so then we have to wait for the next episode. And while we have been waiting, we have been watching the second season of What If that you recommended, and we're enjoying that very much. I see exactly what you're saying. It's much more upbeat, some really terrific stories. Been really enjoying that.
I thought they did a good job too. I'm glad you're liking it.
And that is definitely binge-worthy, but we've been holding off and trying to sort of parse that out a bit. But there's some interesting stuff coming up this year. As we already have talked about here on the podcast, we have the Netflix live action Avatar: The Last Airbender series, which we're looking forward to. And I just learned that the second season of Halo is coming out early in February, so we'll have to figure out how we want to talk about that too. So it's, there's some fun stuff coming up.
Okay, good. Looking forward to it.
And are you ready to talk about Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny?
Oh, I'm ready.
Today we're talking about the story told in Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, and I will read the synopsis from IMDb. Daredevil archaeologist Indiana Jones races against time to retrieve a legendary dial that can change the course of history. Accompanied by his goddaughter, he soon finds himself squaring off against Jürgen Voller, a former Nazi who works for NASA. Did you like this movie, Mike?
Okay, so I have mixed thoughts on this movie. I generally liked it overall. I thought it was fun. There's a lot going for it. And then I have also some criticisms, which we'll get to eventually. But as far as things that I liked, some of the things are things that I think probably other people liked as well. I thought the opening sequence was done pretty well. It's nice to see Indy back in the Nazi era again, even though obviously he's much older than that now. We get that flashback sequence for when he was in his heyday, and I thought that was a lot of fun. It was good seeing him fighting Nazis again, and this time we get to see the Nazis on their heels. Right, this is the end of the war pretty much. So they're on the losing side of things at this point. So that was kind of cool to see. We get to sort of wrap that section up from previous movies, and we see that they're still on the hunt for supernatural artifacts, even as the Nazi Empire, Nazi regime is falling apart. And it's nice to see Indy back in his element, right? With the hat and the whip, disguising himself as a Nazi, fitting in, like all these elements that we've seen before come back. And I think that's a lot of what I liked in this movie. There was a lot of Indiana Jones-ish elements in there that they pulled in from the previous movies. He's globetrotting, right? We get to see him flying to different places, exotic locations. They have the sequence of seeing the little line move across the map as he's flying from one place to another. That classic Indiana Jones effect. They're researching notes from an old notebook. They're following these clues. They're using knowledge of past events and human behavior to track down artifacts. It's very indie, right? Very archaeologist, adventurer. They're solving puzzles, avoiding traps. I love all those things. Those are some elements that I really, really enjoyed from very beginning in Raiders of the Lost Ark, carrying through the series. And a lot of those things are very much inspiration for my Tales of Zara series. So I love that stuff. And I think they did a lot of that pretty well in this movie. We get to see, skeletons with things coming out of their mouths. That's something we've seen before in Indiana Jones. We see the eels, which are like snakes of the sea, and they obviously reference that. I thought that was funny. And then Indy, of course, is always pressing for the artifacts to go into a museum. A lot of these elements that are familiar to us from the previous movies. And I didn't think those things were cheesy like they could have been. I kind of felt in the Crystal Skull you had some of that, or some of it was just kind of cheesy. I think they did it better in this movie. For me, at least, I felt that those aspects fit into the story. They flowed better. Yeah, there's just a lot of cool elements like that. The cave with creepy crawlies all over. The sense of awe and reverence for ancient, long-lost artifacts. And then at the end, it's all, like the Nazi guy at the end, right? He always does himself in, right? In Raiders and in Last Crusade, we see it here. The bad guys end up doing themselves in more than Indy taking them out, which I like that. I liked how they set that up. I thought generally it was a fun story, a fun addition to the series. I thought it was a more competent wrap-up than the previous entry. And I think I originally saw this in the theater when it came out. So again, I think there's some of the theater effect of, You feel it a lot more when you're in the theater. It's like there's a lot more, I don't know, it's just you're immersed into it more. Kind of something we talked about with when we were talking about Avatar. It's like it's a more of an experience than just I'm watching this story play out. So I think that helped my feel for it as well. All that said, at the end of the day, I feel like they should have just left it at 3 movies. I feel like Last Crusade wrapped things up so well. It was hard to top that, and they just didn't with this movie or the last one. So that's kind of a sad note. But I'll talk more about that in detail when we talk about things that maybe could be improved. So your thoughts? Did you like this? What do you think?
I think a lot of what you said is so on point. The Indiana Jones stuff was wonderful. I loved how, for example, you're talking about sort of the indie types of things that he did. I loved how he mouthed off to the Nazis about following a crazy man. And my actual favorite moment was when he was explaining about how he would go out back in time to stop his son from dying. That was some of the best acting that we've ever seen from Harrison Ford. It was just powerful, this moment, and how well it was played. Harrison Ford is a good actor, and the connection made with his character at that moment was brilliant. It was one of the highlights of the film for me. I agree. I love the moments when they're using intellect and analysis to problem solve, even on the fly, even like you have to do it really fast because they're going to die if you don't do it really fast. It was just all of that was pure indie and so much fun, and that is what made these movies so good. That's almost all I can say. Now, if I had to look back, and I really appreciate you bringing up Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, because one of the things that the Crystal Skull felt like was an amusement park ride. It was very two-dimensional throughout. And this did have that three-dimensional feel. They did a good job of bringing us back into the world. They just kept kicking us out again. And so that's something I think we can talk about. Would I have stopped at the 3 movies? And I have to tell you, I'm not a big fan of number 2 either, for the same reason. It feels like a theme park ride. It feels like they're romancing their own special effects, as opposed to allowing us to be in the world and move in through the story. The first one and the third one, I think, are brilliant. So, do I think this one belongs in that group? I would say I would put this one as number 3 for me, as far as like all of the movies. So I don't even remember the name of the second one. Kalima.
The Temple of Doom.
Right, okay. I think Temple of Doom would be like the last one for me, and then Crystal Skull would be the 4th, and then this one would be the 3rd favorite for me. Because it did immerse us to some degree. It just didn't keep us there. Yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about this film, as far as like the things that I liked about it. It was nice to be back in the Indiana Jones universe. I would have liked to have stayed there throughout the entire, what was it, 2 hours and 45 minutes? Is that how long this movie was?
Yeah, it was something like that. It was a long movie. Yeah.
It was a long movie. So,
yeah,
anyways.
240 or something like that, yeah.
Yeah. So what would you have changed as a writer in this story?
So, I mean, since you just mentioned the length, that was the first thing that struck me. It's just, it felt unnecessarily long. I felt like maybe this is less about the writing, although there are, I think, things I think could have trimmed from the writing perspective as well. But maybe it was more of an editing issue or something. I felt like scenes just kind of dragged in some places. Well, maybe in most places. It felt like a lot of the scenes just outlived themselves. It's like, okay, we ready to move on yet? For example, the car chase in Tangiers.
Yes.
It was kind of fun, but it was just too long. Like, I don't know. I mean, I've seen car chases like a million times. We all have. And while it had some fun things, it wasn't interesting enough to keep my attention for that long, and was just unnecessary. There's a lot of other plot stuff to get to, other action scenes to do. We didn't need to be in that one so long. And that was just one example. I think a lot of the scenes felt that way. Not all, but a lot were just like, it felt I don't know, just it needed to be tightened up. Maybe a little bit less dialogue here, a little bit less interaction, something. So that's my overall complaint. It's kind of the first thing, which is a shame because I don't mind being in a long movie if it really engages me throughout. And this was a complaint. I mean, I'm going off on a tangent here, but I'll just be quick. This was a complaint I had about a lot of movies that came out last year, right? From Avatar: Way of the Water, which I think may have actually been December of the previous year, but that kind of started this trend of that and this and Oppenheimer and like a number of movies I saw just like this did not need to be so long. Anyway, so that was one thing.
So here's a question for you.
Okay, yeah.
This just popped into my head. Do you happen to know when movies are streaming and people are watching movies via streaming, if the movie is paid for by the minute? You know, similar to like when people read our ebooks on Kindle Unlimited, we get paid by the page read. And so, you know, every time somebody flips a page on their e-reader in Kindle Unlimited, you know, that increases the amount of money that we're paid. I'm kind of wondering if maybe they've made these really long movies so they get paid more in streaming.
That could be. I mean, the problem with that approach is you're going to bore people and they're going to stop. They won't watch the whole thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it could be.
Unless they're like us who are committed to Indiana Jones.
Right,
and we're
yeah,
just
I guess
watch
that's
it.
true. There's some people who just watch all the way through. That's a good point. That probably is the case, I would imagine.
I don't really know how the filmmakers are paid as far as like streaming is concerned, whether it's just a flat rate contract or whether there's actual per minute residuals of some kind.
Yeah, I don't know either. The opening sequence I generally liked. Sort of had a very sort of Indiana Jones feel back in time. One of the things that first pulled me out of that was when Voller gets knocked off the train in the opening sequence. I was like, oh, that guy's dead. And then we see him again. It's like, wait, how did he survive? Is he like he has a super serum or something? He got smacked by this metal going like 50 miles an hour. There's no way that guy lived through that. And there was no reason for that. They could have just had Indy like kick him off the train or something and flying into the water, you know? So he appears later. So that was kind of weird when he popped back up. I was like, what is the deal with this guy? But no, he's just a normal dude. So yeah, that was not handled well, at least in my opinion. And then when we get to present day for Indiana Jones, you know, when we see older Indy, obviously, it's, you know, years later, I feel like it felt a bit like Han Solo in The Force Awakens.
It was so grim.
Yeah, everything we built up to with this character before, it's like, it was always like this optimistic character. He's excited to search for the next thing. And then when we last saw him, he was getting married. And now it's just, oh, we just tore this guy down. He's living in this small, cramped apartment. He's a bitter old guy, angry at his neighbors playing music too loud. He felt like, you know, get off my lawn, kind of just old guy, almost stereotypical. Why did he bring a bat to tell the guy to put the music down? I just didn't understand that. Like, that's not Indiana Jones. That was just weird. If it felt like, I mean, my guess is, you know, they wanted to have some character growth for him, right? So they show him kind of beaten down and they want to like put him back into the adventure, have one last adventure and build him back up towards the end or something like that. But this was not the way to do that. It felt like a gut punch. I don't know. It's the complaint I have with the whole Star Wars sequel trilogy. It's like, you don't undo everything that came before. You don't undo, you know, the things that brought joy to people. That's just a poor decision. So I didn't like that. There's a way to have him start off a little bit low without, like you said, making it so grim. It didn't need to be that bad. At least have him still be in a house instead of this little cramped apartment. Like, have him have a nice place. Maybe it's empty. Maybe he's still getting a divorce. Maybe that's still there. But give him something. And don't make him, it's like, I don't know. Anyway, let me go through faster. And then when we're introduced to his goddaughter, Helena Shaw, and when we're first introduced to her, it's like in the end of that scene, he basically locks her godfather in with a group of Nazis to be killed. Like, this is the new character that we're supposed to root and get behind? She just left him to die, essentially. That was a terrible choice. I don't understand why they did that. They could have just had him, them run out together and then she runs off on her own. Okay, that would have been fine. But no, we have to set her up to be as cold and callous as possible, I guess. I do not agree with that decision because it doesn't endear us to that character. And I think this is a problem throughout the movie, which I'll hit a couple more of those notes maybe in a minute. And then there were some other little things that pulled me out of it. When he says, I don't believe in magic, but I've seen things I can't explain. How do you not believe in magic? You were on an island with a bunch of Nazis that just vaporized. You had a guy almost pull your heart out of your chest. You saw your father healed by this water from the Holy Grail. Like, it's just a bizarre thing to have him say. I don't understand. And then the end, when Indy gets shot, and they're like, oh, bring him with us and drag him onto the plane with us. That just had no explanation. Why would they do that? It doesn't make any sense. It's like, oh, we want this character to be here so we can show him what happens to us in the climax of the story. Bad. Come on, man. Just have him sneak on the plane. He's Indiana Jones. Doesn't make any sense. So that was a poor decision. And those things are easily fixed. The continental drift line was silly, ridiculous, and unnecessary. I mean, how much do continents drift in a couple thousand years? Maybe a couple hundred feet? How is that going to affect anything? And obviously they found the portal. It was there. Speaking of the portal, if they're not creating this time portal, but they're just finding it, it's just astronomically absurd that they just happen to fly up at the exact moment the portal appears. Like all these events in the movie that happened just happened to coincide exactly with that particular moment in decades. It's just, you can only suspend disbelief so much. I would have rather have it just been magic. I mean, it's just, again, it's just something that pulls you out of the story. And then the portal this time portal reappears every so often. So like planes are just going to like fly in there and go into the past all the time. Wouldn't we see artifacts from them doing that? Like the whole concept was a mistake from the beginning. Yeah, that whole end sequence, the entire climax, you've got Indiana Jones and he basically just sits on the plane. He doesn't do anything. Bizarre choices there at the end. I mean, it was still fun. The thing is, I still enjoyed watching it. Like I said, as an experience in the theater, it was still fun. But looking back at it from a writing perspective, these things were just poor decisions objectively. And then again, at the end, the very, very end, not the very, very end, but where they're still in the past, the Battle of Syracuse, he wants to stay. And then Shaw punches him and takes him back to the future. That was possibly one of the worst decisions of writing decisions of this movie. It's like, if there was supposed to be a character transformation for this person, for this Indiana Jones, you just destroyed it. You didn't let him transform. The choice was taken out of his hands. He made his decision. He wanted to stay in the past. And then, nope, he gets yanked back to the present. He could have had that moment, have her give a rousing speech about how just because he's retired, it doesn't mean he's not able to contribute to the world. It doesn't mean he can't still have a great life. It doesn't mean he can abandon his friends. And she could have said all this and then handed him the hat, and then he takes it and he's like, all right, I'm in. Let's do it. But no, she just punches him, takes him back. Oh, that was just flabbergasting that they made that decision. I think they probably originally ended the movie with him being in the past and died, and no one liked that. So then they bolted on this other thing because that's what it felt like. Anyway, I could go on, but those are some thoughts. What do you think?
I agree with you on everything. Some of the additional things that I noticed was, I think if I had to sum it all up, I would have said more exposition, less action. Because there were some places where some exposition would have connected the dots so beautifully and brought us along with the story as we were watching it, that was all missing. For example, opening sequence. Love it. Having fun. Indiana, messing with the Nazis. Why are we here? There was no exposition to explain what the stakes were. He was just hunting for an artifact. What was so important about this artifact to risk his life infiltrating Nazis as their world was falling apart? And we didn't find that out until almost the very end of that sequence. I would have liked to have known at the very beginning what the stakes were so that I could root for Indy as he was trying to get this artifact away from the Nazis. But we didn't find out what this thing was for until almost the end of the action. And I agree. The guy getting hit in the face with the metal and then suddenly appearing didn't make sense. I too was waiting for this guy to demonstrate some supernatural qualities or elements that would explain how he survived. And we never got that. So it just didn't make sense. And I agree with you 100%. There was absolutely zero connection to Helena Shaw. I did not care what happened to her. And I was sitting there thinking, this is boring. All of this incredibly long, overly long action sequence is boring because I don't have an emotional connection to her. So I don't care. And I think they really messed up not taking the time to lay that groundwork. I don't think the fact that he had a relationship with her father or that she was his goddaughter, is enough. You need to let us know about the character. They need to let us see the interactions between the character and see the relationship so that we can get invested. And they didn't let us do that. I agree 100%. And then it was just too long. Every scene was too long. I got bored every single time because, like you, I was like, okay, I get it. Let's move on. I also was very disappointed with the end. Not so much the punch and the bringing of the back thing. That didn't bother me so much. It was the fact that the resolution was kind of a letdown. It was unsatisfying. Oh, Portal and time travel. I'm a big fan of time travel. I write time travel, so I'm okay with Portal and going through and stuff. And then it's just, oh yeah, I just did that so that you'd scare off the Romans. How would he even know that someone from the future would have the necessary whatever to scare off the Romans? It could have been just a single person who just dropped in after accidentally finding it. It made no sense.
Yeah, and why? Like, did you leave a note saying, "Hey, we need help. Bring some military forces"?
No.
Just some person's going to show up.
It made zero sense. I was also actually hoping that we would find out that the person in the tomb was actually the Nazi. That would have been some closure there, right? Because he ended up dead. And so then just see them, like, I was hoping that, like, the last scene would have been them carrying his body and sticking him in the tomb that he then found. So it was the Nazi's body that they found, not, that was actually the Nazi's body and not Archimedes' body. I think that might have been a nice little wrap for it. To give a sense of satisfaction when we didn't get any satisfaction anyplace else. Yeah, anyway.
Yeah, I think that whole climactic segment, where they're in the past in the battle, was just rather pointless. They didn't affect anything. I mean, it was just like a set piece to have the Nazi die in a not particularly interesting way. I mean, in Indiana Jones, like in Raiders of the Lost Ark, they all get melted by the wrath of God.
And as you pointed out, they get melted by their own actions.
Right.
Which I think is so important.
Yeah. And in Last Crusade, right, the guy drinks from the wrong cup and he ages like 100 years in seconds. Like those are cool things. Here, I mean, he dies in a plane crash. Okay, that's great. Like, it could have been something more interesting than that. There's so much they could have done with that.
Along the same lines, the kid was also a non-sympathetic character. This kid was actually kind of unpleasant and nasty. I think they were supposed to be pulling in sort of like the short round feel or the young Indy feel of Last Crusade, but instead it was just sort of this character that I could not actually get invested in 100%. Obviously, I didn't want the kid to die, but on the other hand, this kid was willing to commit a lot of crimes, including murder. And it was just, it was uncomfortable.
Yeah, I agree. That was another thing. Thank you for bringing that up that I was going to get to. You have these two characters who are sidekicks of Indy in this that we do not care about at all. Not only do we not care about them, as far as we can tell, they're pretty horrible people. I mean, all the evidence shows us they're willing to let people die or kill people as necessary, like without remorse. I mean, that kid just tied that guy up to the chain under the water, and it's like, oh, but he's Nazi. He's a Nazi. He's bad. Like, that kid just murdered that guy.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't necessarily disagree in that moment that I would have done something differently, but if you want us to like be on board with someone, you got to show us, those pet the cat moments, and all we got was kick the cat moments.
And we didn't see the moral center of these people. What is
Right.
the moral center that's pushing them forward, that makes them admirable as heroes?
Yeah, this is one of the biggest things I noticed, which I think the story really lacks. It's it's a moment that you said like was your favorite moment in the movie, where Harrison Ford, where Indy talks about going back in time to save his son. The reason that's powerful, I think, because that's the one moment where we get a sense of heart from this story. Other than that, there's no heart in this story, right? If you go back to Raiders of the Lost Ark, you have the relationship between Indy and Marion and his friendship with Sala, right? It's like you care about these people. Even in Indy 2, you've got Short Round and Willie, and it's like, Willie, yeah, she's kind of annoying, but she's not awful. She doesn't do awful things. You don't want her to die. You care about her well-being. And then, of course, in Last Crusade, he's there with his father, and it's like he has to save him at the end. There's like a lot of heart in these action-adventure movies. Even in the last one, in Crystal Skull, it's like Marion's there. He wants to save her. They end up getting married at the end. We get that moment. It's like, oh, they're there. They walk off. They got their son. Like, again, it's like you have that element of heart. And this one did not have it. They tried to cram it in the last 2 seconds of the movie. Like, oh, he's back together with Marion. Like, why? What changed? She said, are you back? No, he's not back. He wanted to stay back in time. That's the last we saw of him. His decision was, I'm going to die in the past. It wasn't, oh yeah, I'm going to live and go to the future. They completely botched that storyline. And we never saw her until that moment in the movie. So it's like, okay, that's cool. They want us to feel, but they didn't earn it.
Yeah, exactly. They didn't earn it. Yep.
Yeah, it's disappointing. I think for me, okay, I'm going to step off. I think for me, I loved the first trilogy. I still love Temple of Doom. I wouldn't put it at the bottom as you do. I think there's a lot of good, fun stuff there. I think one of the areas they screwed up with Temple of Doom was the indie stuff that I mentioned at the beginning of this. It's like the going through the old journals and puzzling things out and figuring out the riddles and avoiding traps and things like that. That it didn't have that, right? And there wasn't this globe trotting. It was they were in this one place pretty much. After the intro, there's in that place the whole movie. So they lost some of that adventurous, Indiana Jones stuff that we loved from the first movie. And then I think Spielberg realized it because it's like all of that stuff was back in Last Crusade, and it was done so well, and it was so fun. So yeah, anyway, I still love Temple of Doom even with its flaws. But this one, I don't know. I enjoy watching this movie, but I don't think it's very well written, honestly.
What do you take away as a writer from Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny?
For me, there's a couple of things. On the plus side, something that we've mentioned before, stick with what works. Remember the elements of your production, your story that people loved, from previous entries in the series. If you can, that's not always easy to identify. As I think we mentioned that with the Temple of Doom, right? They kind of made a misstep there and they corrected it. And I think those elements are here. And I think those are the fun parts of this movie. The other writing takeaway would be on the other side of that. Remember to have some heart in your story, especially if that's what you had in previous entries of your story. Don't lose that. That's pretty important. That's kind of a key element. So those are my takeaways. How about you?
I think my takeaways are to not fall in love with the plot and make sure that I keep my focus on the characters, because I really think that's what makes it too long. They fall in love with their fight scenes. They fall in love with their chase scenes. They fall in love with their whatever scenes, right? And they don't stay with the characters. And that goes to what I said about the exposition. Exposition is conversation between characters. Good exposition should be really organic, natural conversation between characters that answer questions for us and pose new ones. And they also are an opportunity to develop relationships and demonstrate relationships. And I think, like you said, it's the big grand sum of that is heart, as you put it. And so I think that's what I take away as a writer is that hard, what it looks like is keeping that focus on the characters, their relationships, their actions, and the conversations, so that all of these things build together to keep the reader, the viewer, engaged, interested, and in the world.
That's terrific. Can I add something else?
Absolutely.
As you were speaking, it made me realize you're talking about exposition. I think I agree with you. And yet on the other side, I think they had too much in some cases where they were like trying to puzzle out things from like the journal or from the Graphicos, whatever. They're like going on and on about, oh, everyone knows this thing has 9 columns and this and that and the other. And it's like, I was so bored because I didn't have any connection to any of that. And it's like, just make that stuff simpler. It's like, it was too complicated. And I love that stuff. And I still like, just get us to the next thing already.
Yeah, but I think in part that was because the sequences were too long. And it did take too long.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us as we talked about the story told in Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. A big thank you to our Patreon supporters and all our subscribers. We're so grateful for your support and your encouragement. The Stories Told podcast is available on multiple podcast platforms, and we thank you for liking and subscribing or following, depending on where you're listening. It may not be a big deal to you, but it means a lot to us. You can find Michael Grayford at michaelgrayford.com and E.W. Barnes at 1000years.com, and those links are in the show notes. Join us next time as we discuss the story told in the 2007 film Stardust. Thanks, Mike. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time on the Stories Told podcast.